Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are we doing today? Good. All right, now, how about yourself? Here's what we got going on here today. We've gone through a lot of effort to kind of bring World War II alive for you. Reading about it in a book's one thing, watching it on screens another, being able to actually see the stuff that literally was in the war is a totally different experience. So what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to give you kind of an American perspective on things, and we're going to go through some of the other nationalities involved in the conflict. So this is what you call a little bit of enlightenment. Now, first of all, go ahead and take a look at myself here. If you pay very close attention, what am I? United States Marine Corps in the Pacific, ladies and gentlemen. The war in the Pacific was entirely different than the war in Europe. For lack of a better term, it was a war of extermination. Let's face it, as a Marine, if I come across one of my fellow dead Marines, and I see the Japanese have basically disemboweled him and put his innards inside out just because they could, am I going to take any Japanese prisoner? No. Which means this is a war without rules. It's kill or be killed. I'm not taking prisoners, and neither are they. And after all, they're not going to surrender anyway, so that means you basically got to kill all of them. All right, so big picture here for you. Where you are sitting right now is the furthest extent of Camp Elliott. You may or may not know this, but this is the end of the firing range of Camp Elliott, which at the time of the war, we're talking about the largest training facilities for the United States Marine Corps, and that's the reason why the Camp Pendleton opened up in 1943 in order to take some of the pressure off of Camp Elliott. That's why if you go up down some of these trails over here, you come across little signs that says don't pick up anything that looks weird because it might go boom if you pick it up. Kind of a bad thing, makes your day very bad, right? Now, before I go into exactly what I'm carrying and what I've got armed with here, I need a volunteer.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, put it on. Oh yeah, no, I'm playing full dress up. Now let's start from top to bottom here. First of all, you got your M1 steel helmet. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a wonderfully designed helmet, isn't it? Yes, it is. But guess what? Is it going to stop any bullets?
Nope.
See, check this out. This right here is what you call a really bad day. There's a reason why these things got nicknamed brain buckets. Well, if you got a steel helmet and a bullet's going to go right through that thing, then you got to ask yourself the question, why even bother wearing a steel helmet to begin with? Well, that comes down to this. This is an artillery round fired at long range directly into your lines. This would have a fuse in it. It's hollow, which means when it gets right above your head, it goes boom. And this breaks apart into all sorts of small little pieces like this. This is not as fast as a bullet. This will actually reflect off of this helmet. It's going to give you a hell of a headache, but are you still going to be alive?
Yes.
Exactly. So you wear this for shrapnel and things like that. Now, if you look at the way I'm recruited and versus what he's got on here, he's got a full pack. You've got your mess tin, you got your blanket, you got some extra rations in there, you also got your bayonet for your rifle, and you got yourself a shovel for digging in. So let me ask you this, if you are in a combat situation, you are advancing upon the Germans, the Italians, or the Japanese, do you want to be carrying this on your back?
Yeah.
No, because you're moving forward, which means you're not going to be digging in. So you're going to ditch this. Now, you're just like I am. You've got the bare essentials of life going on here, right? First of all, you've got your cartridge belt with your ammunition, and you've got your first aid pouch. The idea behind the first aid pouch is that you got a pressurized little bandage on the inside of that. Once you pop the tin open, it goes poosh. You get bandages going everywhere. You got two in there. Concept is this. Let's say you take an 8mm round right through the shoulder. Not going to kill you, but it's going to ruin your day. Well, it's going to leave about an inch hole going in one side and about a 4-inch hole going out the back. Because lead, ladies and gentlemen, is very soft. When it hits something, it expands out and, of course, then makes a big hole going out the other side. So you got a nasty mess here. Bones, ligaments, bone shards, and all sorts of stuff. So you put a small bandage on the entry wound, a big bandage on the other side, and therefore you hopefully get the medic by, get them back to a field hospital, keep them from bleeding out. You always wind up using, the guy that gets wounded, you use his bandage, never yours. Because if I get hit, do I want to be without my bandage? Nah, again, it's a bad day for me, right? You'll notice he's also got a canteen here, and he's dressed like he's fighting in Europe. You don't really have to worry about water in Europe. It rains a lot there. So if you want to refill your canteen in a string, no problem. Fill in your canteen up, drop in a little chlorine tablet. Yep, that's how you kill off all those fun little things like malaria and typhus. Avoid getting things like ringworm and things like that. You'll notice I've got two canteens because this is war in the Pacific versus the war in Europe. So you're in a much more hot, nastier climate in the Pacific, hence you need more canteens to keep yourself hydrated. Now, regardless, let's talk about the moneymaker here. Each soldier is armed with this M1 Garand rifle, 30-06 caliber, and this is actually probably the best firearm ever put into the hands of the American infantryman. The way this works is actually quite simple. First of all, throw open the bolt. You now got to load it. Well, you reach into your pouch here, you pull out 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition. It's held in there with a metal clip. You take this, you place it right here into the breech, and that's spring loaded. Once you push that in, what's going to happen is that the bolt is automatically going to slam shut. Now they teach you in basic, you got to know how to load this thing properly, because if you don't, that bolt is going to slam onto your thumb. You get M1 thumbs, and it will take your thumbnail off. I've done it through my own stupidity, and I can tell you it hurts a lot. Like, the most amount of pain I think I've ever felt in my entire life when your thumbnail gets ripped off. Like, no lie. Moving on. Now that you got this thing loaded, it's semi-automatic. That means I can load and fire this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I can fire 8 times without reloading as fast as I pull that trigger. That means all the other armies in the world don't have semi-automatic. They're still using the old bolt action, one at a time. This gives the American soldier a much greater firing capacity, which means you can kill a lot more of the bad guys about this is that put everyone in your forehead. When you fire off that 8th round, bang, bolt fly back, and that immediately gets ejected out. It lets you know you're unloaded. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, oh no, the Germans and the Japanese know you're unloaded. They're going to rush and kill you now. Do you really think you're going to hear that where everybody is shooting and crap blowing up and people are yelling and screaming? No. Plus, are you ever going to be the one-man lone G.I. Joe out there killing everyone and everything, or are you operating as a cohesive group? Cohesive group, which means, let's say we're wearing the same uniform here. If you actually run out of ammunition, I've got you covered while you're reloading, and then while I'm reloading, guess what? He's got me covered. So therefore, you've got to work in firing teams, going back and forth in order to make sure you can actually, do things like win a war. So here's what I'm going to wind up doing for you now, ladies and gents. We've got quite a few presenters here that are going to be going and give you a full perspective of the war. So here we've got Staff Sergeant Fisher, going to tell you a little bit about the Women's Army Corps of the U.S. Army, and hence what women's roles here on the home front were during the conflict.
Hello, thank you for having me today. So I'm here to give you a little bit of insight about what it was like to be a woman in the military back when it all started, during World War II. First, we're going to back up a little bit to 1939. I was living in San Diego with my family, and the war in Europe was something that we heard about on the radio, and we read about in the newspaper, but it was just a headline. It was something that didn't affect my life directly at all. I'd never even been outside of California, so France, Poland, all these countries seemed so far away. All of that changed on December 7th, 1941, when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Suddenly the war, which had been so far away, could be in our own backyard today or tomorrow. Suddenly my brothers, my neighbors, my coworkers and friends started enlisting into the military. And so I wanted to do my part too. Now, I didn't have to join the Army. There were lots of other choices. There were quite a few civilian jobs for women, a lot of industry, helping build airplanes, especially in this area. There were a lot of jobs like that. Also, there were other branches of the military that I could have gone into, although the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps was formed first. It was formed at the very beginning of 1942. So in the beginning, we were known as the WAAC, Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. And, a lot of women had different reasons for enlisting. Personally, I wanted to help see the war through. I wanted to help get it over and done with and bring the boys back home. Patriotism was probably the number one reason why someone would decide to join the WAC. But there were other reasons too. You might think, I bet some women, joined up to catch a man. That was certainly true. I could say some of my friends, especially when the guys were all going overseas, where are you going to find any? If you're looking to get married, the Army's probably a pretty good place to look, right? So I started basic training. That was 4 weeks. They shipped me from San Diego off to Fort Des Moines, Iowa, which let me tell you, it's a pretty big difference. San Diego wasn't a huge town, but nothing compared to Iowa. Iowa, it's just farmland and really small towns. It was quite a culture shock. The other thing that was a culture shock was just the full indoctrination into the Army lifestyle. Suddenly I'm getting up at too early in the morning, doing calisthenics, having to wear the uniform, learning about things like how to salute properly, learning about military etiquette, and then marching. They had us march. So it's kind of funny. It's like, well, why did the government decide the best way to fill these positions was to have women actually join the military? I mean, couldn't they have just hired civilians, right, to just come and type and do all that stuff? Well, there's a few reasons. One is, if you've got a bunch of civilian women on an Army base, they're not going to relate to the men very well. They're going to be wearing their regular clothes. They can quit anytime they want. They can move away, and lots of stuff happens. And they're not going to identify with any of the men there. At least this way, we're wearing the uniform, we're getting up, we're exercising, we're marching, and so we can sympathize with what they're going through. We definitely have our experience is a lot closer to what the men are doing. And then the main reason, though, is just control. Yes, they could have hired civilians, but how could they control you? If you're in the military decides what job you do and where you do it. So they could say, okay, where do we need to fill the positions? Where is it most important? And we could train people to do those exact things. We could basically make them move there and stay there for the duration of the war if they're in the military. So that was the main reason why. So after 4 weeks of basic, you learn full indoctrination into Army life. Then they make you take some tests. And then depending on how you do on the test, that's where you go next, because then you've still got more training after basic. So there were, I won't say choices, because you didn't get to choose. You could put in a request for a certain place, or a certain line of work, but ultimately the Army chose for us. So one place you might wind up is in Cooks and Bakers School, learning how to feed an army. You might wind up in the Signal Corps, working on radios and other communication devices. There was also the Motor Corps, where you'd be driving vehicles, fixing vehicles, helping build vehicles. Keep in mind, this was kind of a new thing too, because a lot of women in the 40s didn't have driver's license. It's not like none did, but still, there were a lot fewer drivers among women than among men. It was kind of a new thing, the idea of women actually working on vehicles, especially those half-ton trucks and all of that. There was also Officers Candidate School. If you tested really well, you could become an officer with the WHAC. Then finally, there was administrative school, which is where they put me. And that was just because I had an office background, was pretty good at typing, and things of that nature. So after basic, I went off to administrative school for 6 more weeks of training, basically how to do paperwork the Army way, fill out reports, things like stamping dog tags. A lot of the work was redundant and repetitive, but it was okay, and I was doing my bit. And see, the thing is, for every troop they send overseas to fight, there's about 10 people in the wings supporting them, cooking the food, getting the gear together, building the equipment, shipping the equipment. There's tons of jobs to fill. So it was really, really important that for every man who went overseas, somebody took his place doing that job, and that person was very often a woman. So after administrative school, they shipped me off to Kansas, and I started my work in an office building, basically. In the summer of 1943, though, there was a big change. We had a decision to make. Up until then, even though we had been in the Army and had all of the trappings of all the other Army personnel, we still weren't technically full-fledged members. The word auxiliary in our title meant that we were in the Army, but not all the way. We were kind of attached to the Army. So in the summer of 43, the government decided that we'd been doing such a good job supporting the troops that they were going to make us full-fledged members of the Army. They dropped the word auxiliary from the title, and we just simply became the WAC, or Women's Army Corps. At this point, we had a choice. We could decide to just leave, or we could re-enlist as members of the new WAC. Let me tell you, the Army lifestyle is not for everybody. There were a lot of women in my company that just decided, this Army life isn't for me. I hate bed check at 11 o'clock. I hate the uniform. I'm not doing the job I really wanted to do, and ultimately this wasn't what I really expected, And if I have a chance to get out of it, I'm going to take it. Get me on the next train out of here. Myself, I decided to stay in for the same reasons that I joined. The patriotism, wanting to just help do whatever it takes to get the war over and done with. So myself and about 111 of us stuck around out of 200, so just a little bit more than half. Kind of shows you, Army life definitely is not for everybody. One of the main things that made, life in the Army difficult was, we didn't call it sexism back then, but there were definitely attitudes that a woman's place was not in the military. Even though we weren't ever going to be trained to use firearms, and none of us joined because we were actually going to be fighting. The government never intended for us to fight, although we could be sent overseas. But a lot of the attitudes, when an idea is brand new, a lot of times it can seem wrong at first. Maybe we don't even know why we think it's wrong. It just sounds wrong, like a woman joining the Army and being with all those men, and that's not ladylike. Wearing that green uniform, that's not right. She should be at home in the kitchen, right? So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of heckling, there was some harassment, just things, funny things you wouldn't even think of. Like, one time in my barracks, they caught a guy peeking in the window into the showers, So we called the MPs, and they were like, oh, sorry, it won't happen again. So then the next week, another guy comes in, goes right into our living area, and men are not allowed in our barracks, right? So call the MPs, they come, actually he booked it out before the MPs came. So then the next week, guy does it again, comes back in. This time we were ready for him. We had our ropes, took the belts from our ropes, tied them all up into a long rope. We were waiting for him, crouching below the furniture, kind of hiding. He comes in, we lift up the rope, trip him, then tie him up. Call the MPs, they make a big deal. Oh, we're so sorry. Oh, let's handcuff him, all this stuff. He didn't even get in any trouble. Yeah, it's just a load of you-know-what, in my opinion. Anyway, can you imagine what would have happened if a woman had done that in a man's barracks? We would have been in trouble. It's just not right. So, after 1943, I stayed in. Now, when we made that decision, all of us who decided to stick with it, it was a big deal because we were signing up for the duration of the war, plus however long the Army saw fit to keep us. It could be another 5 years. Who knows? Who knows where they're going to send me? I might wind up going overseas if things don't start, turning around with the war. So it's a big deal to stay in there. But ultimately, I'm glad I did, and I'm, like I said before, I'm in for the duration. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to my Australian counterpart. He's a soldier and currently stationed in the South Pacific. Thank you for having me.
I'm Sergeant Muldoon of the 39th Australian Infantry Battalion, and I will be telling you guys a little bit about what was going on in the Pacific. The Pacific was a whole different theater. A lot of different things happened there than we did in Europe. In 1941, the Australian government had a real problem. The Japanese were basically winning the war. They were moving south very, very quickly. They'd already defeated the British in Singapore, and they were moving down the Dutch East Indies. And the Australians knew it was just a matter of time before they were knocking at the front door. The problem was, all of the Australian army was fighting the Germans in North Africa. So they needed to come up with a solution. The solution was to bring militia units that were basically home guard in Australia, send them to New Guinea, and hope that they could stop the Japanese. Now, these militia units, they were young or they were very old. We have any 18-year-olds here? 17-year-olds? You guys would have gone through, they would have sent you guys out without a lot of military training. I'm 39 years old. Technically speaking, I'm probably too old to go fight in North Africa, but now with the Japanese coming close, they sent guys my age to go and do that. Now, the clothing that I'm wearing in the uniform is a little bit different than what you've seen already. Now, the first thing you probably noticed is the hat. This is called a slouch hat. This is a stereotypical Australian hat. It goes back almost 100 years. They still wear them today. Now, the reason I'm not wearing a helmet is because it was believed at the time the Japanese invaded New Guinea that because the jungles were so thick that anytime there were any shrapnel bursts, that the trees and the foliage would absorb most of that, and it wouldn't be any real danger, not much of a danger to the soldier. Now, that turned out not to be true, and it was just as dangerous in a jungle as it was anywhere else. But by that point, the Australians liked wearing this hat. They felt that it distinguished themselves. It also was nice protection from the sun, so people could wear it, even though a helmet would have offered better protection. The uniform I'm wearing is cotton. It's not wool. In Europe, you wore wool, but in the Pacific, it's much too hot for that. It's completely designed for desert warfare. It was originally tan. When the Australian forces got to New Guinea, they found that the tan did not blend in well with the jungles that they were dealing with. So what they did was they boiled water, they got green dye, and they threw the uniforms in that vat, and they dyed them green. And that sounds great, but the humidity is so high in New Guinea, once you get fighting and you're out in that high humidity, the dye starts to run and stains your skin green. Not a lot of fun. The other things I'm wearing, these brown boots, these are leather boots. Leather does not mix very well in high humidity with moisture. As you're walking through the jungles, sometimes you're walking through mud up to your kneecaps. So your boots are constantly wet. Australian soldiers oftentimes went through boots 3 or 4 pairs every 6 weeks was not uncommon. You really hoped if your boot was falling apart that you found a cache of equipment really soon, which they airdropped them to the troops in the jungle. And if you didn't find one, you might be without boots, and that puts you in a very dangerous situation because of diseases. The jungles were full of diseases. Malaria, dengue, yellow fever. More soldiers actually died from disease than they died from Japanese bullets. Now, as you look, I'm a sergeant, but I don't have any sergeant insignia. Any idea why that might be? Any thoughts? What do you think? Absolutely. The Japanese had a tradition of shooting officers and NCOs. They believed if they were able to shoot all of the leadership within a unit, it would demoralize the rest of the men, and they would panic, and they would be very easy to take over. So the Australians came up with the idea of not wearing any insignia, and they would give their NCOs and their officers nicknames. I might be called Curly instead of Sergeant. That way, if they heard that name, they wouldn't have any idea what it meant, and it would offer somewhat of a protection against Japanese bullets. A little bit more about the equipment that I'm wearing. This is an M1 carbine. This is an American rifle, not Australian. The Australians actually carry a World War I rifle called a Lee Enfield. The reason I'm carrying American is because this shot a little bit faster than the bolt action rifle, and these were very popular from the Australian troops. They would get them from Americans by trading, sometimes even stealing them. My grandfather served in the South Pacific. He told me you always knew that an Australian unit was close by when things started disappearing. He one time commented that the Australians stole anything that wasn't nailed down. Even the leggings I'm wearing are in fact American. These might have been issued to me, or I might have traded an American soldier for them, or perhaps even stolen. The leggings are great. They go all the way to my knees, and they protect my feet from all kinds of things like the mud, but also possibly from snake bites and even insect bites. You don't want to get bitten by a mosquito. Now, if you get wounded in the South Pacific, your life is really rough. Now, being wounded is bad enough, but if you're wounded in the European theater, you get shot or you get some shrapnel. The medic comes over, he treats you, they put you on a stretcher, put you on a jeep, take you to an aid station. Pretty soon, you're in Paris in a hospital, getting treated. Not in the South Pacific. The jungles were so thick there, and you were so far away from civilization. If you got shot or you got hit, the medic came over, he patched you up, and then they put you on a stretcher. And they had a couple of men, Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. These were basically natives that they had hired to carry wounded soldiers out of the jungle. Sometimes they would take 20 to 30 miles before they got to an aid station. So you hoped, if you got wounded, that you might make it out. But you always had the more danger of getting infections or getting bit by a mosquito. So once you got wounded, your chances of survival were not very good. The last thing I want to tell you about is the bayonet. This is all on British. Number 3, the Enfield rifle, is because the Australians were part of the British Commonwealth, they carried a British rifle. As you can see, it's very long, it's very dangerous. The fighting in the South Pacific tended to be close combat, very close to your enemy. Sometimes when you went on patrol, you could have just a couple of trees between you and the enemy. And the bayonet was very important because oftentimes, if your rifle jammed or you got really close, you didn't have a chance to shoot. This is what you would use. It's very, very close. It's a very personal way to kill your enemy. You get right in his eyes and you know you've done it. Psychologically, these things are very, very intimidating to your enemy. Before I wrap up, are there any questions? All right, well now we have a German that's going to tell you about the German perspective of World War II.
Oi! Come in here. Yeah. Behind you won't need it.
What?
You won't need it.
Oh my,
I have something better for you. Unlike the Allies, we don't ask for volunteers. We want to go.
That's the German army. That's
Good afternoon. I am Oberfeldwebel, a senior sergeant, Philip Thompson. My friends call me Philip. You can call me Oberfeldwebel. Now, we're going to discuss a little bit about our war. A couple of things to understand beforehand. I was not a National Socialist. I was never a member of the party. You know what National Socialist is? Nazis? Less than 20% of the country were members of the party. That does not mean we do not support the state. That is a mindset that was ingrained in every German from birth. I freely joined the army in 1936 because I felt it was my duty to protect my country. I didn't care about the politics. When I joined, Herr Hitler was still Chancellor. He had just come to power. Now, in hindsight, there were some mistakes made. How old are you? 16? Good to know. Good to know. When I joined the Army, the Hitler Youth had just started. It wasn't mandatory. By 1944, every male youth had been enrolled to the Hitler Youth. That was pre-boot camp. That prepared you for the Army. By 1944, 15-year-olds were fighting. Ladies, you did not escape this either. They had BDM. They had flak bags. 8.8 centimeter, 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. It had a range of 20,000 feet and was used to routinely shoot down British and American bombers. Every plane you hit, 17 lives lost. Your average bomber raid lost 5% of its force. 5% of 1,000 bomber raid, that's a lot of planes. That's a lot of aircraft. You sweating yet? Yeah, stuff up. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the equipment. And with equipment, we're going to talk a little bit about tactics and doctrine. And the differences between the Allies and the Germans and their thought process in combat. Nice heavy wool. Perfect for European operations. Gets wet, it'll still keep you warm. Not so useful in Russia. Horrible in Africa. That's why we issue specialized uniforms for Africa. In Russia, you just had to suffer. Ammunition pouches. You carried 60 rounds of 7.92 millimeter ammunition for this. This is the K98K or Kurtz rifle. Bolt action, it carries 5 rounds. Not like the Americans with their 8 round. Not like the British with their 10 rounds. 5. Sounds like something of a disadvantage? Not really. Tactics, doctrine. The Allies believed that the infantrymen were used to kill the enemy. You used the machine gun to suppress the enemy until the infantry could come up and do their job. German tactical thinking was fundamentally different. You used the infantry to suppress the enemy until the machine gun showed up to kill the enemy. How did we lose the war to them? Anyhow. Tactics define your weapons. Why that this weapon was perfectly suited to your average German soldier. Now, everyone's seen the movies, yes? Some of you play Call of Duty. Everyone knows that every evil German carried one of these.
Oh, yeah.
Not the case. The MP40 was issued to NCOs, non-commissioned officers, sergeants like me, and officers. It fired a 9mm pistol round. Far less range, far less power. These were, however, perfect for close-in situations. Cities, trenches. You sweating yet? Oh, good. I wouldn't want you to think you're getting out of this for free. Now, everyone recognizes this? Stahlhandgranat, stick grenade. Holdover from World War I. Still useful. You can throw this farther than your standard American pineapple grenade. far less powerful. This works off of concussion only, no shrapnel. In 1943, 1944, they attached a cover to this that would give it greater lethal force. It wasn't used all that much though. This was strictly concussion. And if you don't think concussion can kill you, you are wrong. Turn, please. Like the Americans and the British, you lived off your back. This is how you ate. Here's where you slept. Here's your water. Bread bag for extra food, other small utensils. Gas mask canister. We heard gas mask. Even though it was not used, there was a great fear of gas stemming from World War I. There it is. Entrenching tool. Like Mr. Sutton mentioned, digging in is your friend. The deeper you go, the safer you're probably going to be. What he's not carrying, you're too young. One of these. Now they both pointed this out, it's the bayonet. Such a small, simple weapon. Probably one of the most feared weapons carried by an infantryman for its psychological effect. You're in the field, under fire, you get hit by a bullet, it just happened to be your time. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Getting hit with one of these is a deliberate, obvious act. The man at the other end of this is 2 feet away from you. His sole intention is to kill you with this. And when I hit you with this, I'm not going here. Far too much bone to get through, and if it gets stuck, now I have to break the bullet blowing a cavity into your chest to withdraw it. I'm going to get you right here. Right in the stomach. It goes in easy, it comes out easy. That makes a horrible wound. If I'm lucky, and I probably will be, you will now lie there for hours, bleeding out. And it's uncomfortable. You're going to be thirsty. You're going to be calling for your buddies in the shell crater, in that trench. Come help me. You're going to call for your mother. You're going to call for your brother. You're going to call for your sister. Your friends are going to hear that, and their morale is going to plummet. And I'm going to wait. Wait for one of you to stand up, come help me. Now I'm going to shoot you. And if I'm lucky, you won't die. And now there are 2 of you out there doing the same thing. Psychology. Ah, you sweating now? Oh, good. All right, now, I don't mean to torture him. Just... All right. Who was I? Why do I talk about these kind of things? Why do I mention things like this? Context. When you study World War II, your world history class, you're reading it from a book. It's highly sanitized. It gives you when it started, when it stopped. Yeah? It might mention the major battles. That's about it. It doesn't delve into the politics of things. Politics drives war, let's face it. It doesn't give you much in the way of context. Why did this happen? That's why we're here. That's why we give you this presentation. More of a why. But why did the Germans start World War II? And let's be honest, they started World War II. Anybody? Yes. Absolutely correct. The Treaty of Versailles was designed to punish Germany after the war, after World War I. My father fought in World War I. I grew up listening to him talk about that treaty, that wretched treaty. how they gutted a once great empire. Which is why it was my civic duty to join the army in 1936. I was salivating at the chance to reclaim sacred German territories, the Sudetenland, when they walked into it unopposed. Czechoslovakia, unopposed. When they invaded Poland, well, at that point is when the war was declared. Do you know who Germany's ally was at that point?
Italy.
Yes? Who else? Russia. Russia. 2 weeks after the Germans invaded Poland, the Russians did the same thing. They split Poland in half. Now, for Hitler, it was just buying time. In 1940, they turned and they invaded the Low Countries in France. It took them 2 months to crush the French and push the British off the continent. At that point, they were the masters of Europe. And that's when they started making even bigger mistakes. Understand, mistakes. Mistake after mistake after mistake. They allied with the Italians, who invaded Greece. Who has any respect for the Greek army? The Italians did. 2 weeks after they invaded. And the Greek army, with no tanks, a joke of an air force, had the Italians on their knees. It took crack German troops to break through the mountains. Same thing with Africa. The Italians attacked the British. Made some great initial gains. And then the British finally got hold of their senses and started crushing the Italians. It took the Germans sending 15th and 21st Panzer divisions to stabilize them. Now, you said you were 16? You realize that by 1944, gentlemen, you've been drafted. Every single one of you. You had no choice. Stand up. Men, gentlemen, stand up. Look to your left, look to your right, look to your friends. By the end of the war, hey, that wasn't an invitation to talk. That was an invitation to stand up and look at your friends. By the end of the war, half of you are dead. Go ahead and sit down. Think about that. Let that sink in a little bit. Half of you are gone. You haven't even seen your 18th birthday. Contact. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we open up for you to come up here. I'm a member of the California Historical Group. I've been doing this for a long time. Before that, I was an active duty Chief Petty Officer of the United States Navy. I served for 22 years. I did 2 combat tours in Iraq. When I talk to you about the weapons, about the effects of combat, about what a bayonet does, and how I will use it, it's because I have context. I saw it. I'm not trying to get you sick. I'm not trying to freak you out. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to give you a better understanding of what happened, and more importantly, why, without injecting politics. Not too much. Like I said, it's almost impossible to remove politics from war. How much time we have? Okay. With that, Mr. Sutton's going to come on top of the vehicle, and then we'll invite you up here for Q&A and take a look at
What we've done here is brought in quite a little selection of original World War II paraphernalia for you. Just a quick little background about kind of the two biggest things that are sitting here. The Jeep came off the assembly line July the 8th, 1944, Toledo, Ohio. You're talking about a grand total of just under 600,000 of those made by the United States during World War II. That comes out roughly at about the height of production at 243 Jeeps coming off the assembly line from Ford and from Willys Overland every day. Think about that, 243 vehicles every day. It's the reason why the United States is known as the arsenal of democracy. Now that particular Jeep never went overseas. It stayed here stateside. All vehicles, whether you're talking about a tank, all the way down to a motorcycle, if it was made here in the United States and went overseas, it stayed overseas. It just was not economically feasible for the U.S. government to pack all that stuff back onto ships and send it all back to the United States. Plus, you ran into the question of, what do you do with it once it gets back here? So what we did after the war is we sold off all the surplus stuff to fledgling countries that were recovering from the war, like Britain, like France, like the Netherlands, etc., etc. Now, the motorcycle was made and purchased by the German Army in 1940. It was originally made by BMW out of Bavaria in southern Germany. Through the restoration process, you can trace the history of this vehicle. And also through the serial numbers. Purchased in 1940. At some point after it went into German military service, it was captured by the Russians. That's because when I was doing the restoration, it was painted Russian green underneath the paint job that it had when I got it. Going down from there, it was the German Army gray, obviously, so you can kind of trace the history. I purchased it out of Lithuania, 5-6 year restoration job. So unlike the Jeep that stayed stateside, that actually was in the war on the Eastern Front during World War II. A lot of people have asked about the bicycle. Big European thing here. And even today, if you go to Europe, lots of people get around by bicycles. It's built within their culture. There are bike lanes through major cities. And trust me, if you go to a major European city, it's more dangerous to walk in the bike lane than it is in the middle of the street. No lie. With that being said, in World War II, it was part of the militaries of Europe, in particular Germany, France, Russia, that they had entire units of troops that were mobilized on bicycles. That bicycle has a rifle rack on it. So you can think about it like that. And look at how much faster you could go. If you have a guy all kitted out with 80 pounds of gear, you're going to be able to do maybe at most 18 miles on foot marching. However, you put a guy on a bicycle, and now they're going to be able to cover 40 miles in a day rather than 18. So it's all about the mobility factor that was being encouraged here. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of other little odds and ends. If you want to come up, ask individual questions, that would be a wonderful thing. That's one of the reasons why we went through the trouble of doing this. The only big thing is please do not ask to handle any of the firearms. I like my job and I would like to keep it that way. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.